Let me set the scene for you for today's gospel story. According to Matthew's gospel, Jesus has entered Jerusalem for the Passover on Palm Sunday with thousands of other pilgrims. He's caused a tremendous flurry with his arrival, and all week has had brush after brush with the authorities as he's offered his surprising and often controversial teachings in the temple. And now here is our story for today. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" And they answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away.
Well, Jesus is in the big leagues now. No more preaching on the lush meadows of the Galilee. No more teaching on its grassy hillsides. No more healing by its stately, sturdy olive trees. No, this is the big leagues. Now he's in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, for centuries, the center of commerce and strategy and intrigue and religion. And in Jerusalem, the things of God are big, big business. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're in control of almost all of that business. It's Yankee Stadium to Dodger Town. It's Augusta National to Meadowood. It's Wimbledon to West End Tennis Club. You get my point? I read a story recently about the difference between a small town and a big city. The story says a newsboy was standing on the corner in New York with a stack of papers yelling, "Read all about it, 50 people swindled, 50 people swindled." A curious small-town man visiting the Big Apple walked over, purchased a paper, and checked out the front page. Finding nothing, the man said, "There's nothing in here about 50 people swindled." The newsboy ignored him and went on calling out, "Read all about it, 51 people swindled." Yes, the game is different in the big city. And to make matters worse, these religious leaders knew that this upstart from Nazareth was coming, and they were loaded for bear. Matthew puts it, "So the Pharisees went and plotted how to tangle him in his words." So we see that these self-righteous religious professionals have constructed a plan to get rid of these followers and Jesus himself, who actually believed that God might be doing a new thing, sending them back to their nets up north, publicly destroying yet again another upstart with religion. So the Herodians are the first. The Herodians are the first to take a jab at Jesus. It's a salvo meant to make a little dent in Jesus' credibility, and then no doubt that the Pharisees will come off the bench in the ninth inning and finish him off. Now here's the surprising thing, though. The surprising thing is that the Herodians are a group loyal to Rome. And the Herodians are almost always at odds with the Pharisees over anything and everything. So their seemingly joining forces here against Jesus is much like modern-day Rush Limbaugh and Al Sharpton going on a picnic with their families together. It's indicating to us just how concerned both of these tenured power groups were. From the opposite side, about Jesus' message. So Jesus, they ask, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? I have two younger sisters, and one of the great things about growing up with two younger siblings is that you always get to manipulate them a little bit. Usually trick them into doing things. And as their older brother, I would trick them into things like my parents would ask me to take out the garbage, and I'd trick them into doing it. They go to the mailbox, I trick them into it. Sweep the garage, I trick them into doing it. And oftentimes, my trick was a very simple one. I would say to them, okay, let's flip for who folds the laundry. Then I'd take out a coin, and I'd say, heads I win, tails you lose. The funny thing is, my sisters still fall for that now. They're in their 40s. You see, in some ways, this is what the Herodians are doing. The Herodians are playing the exact same game here with Jesus. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? If Jesus says yes, then he's going to alienate all those who are struggling against Roman oppression, believing Israel should stay obedient to the Torah and God and not support the oppressor. Heads, we win. If Jesus says no, then Jesus is going to be at odds with the entire Roman Empire, who will quickly label him a seditious, dangerous opponent of the empire. Tails, you lose. So heads, Jesus is a heretic. Tails, Jesus is a seditionist. Give me the coin, Jesus says. And he takes that small piece of dynamite in his hands. Now, you can just imagine the Herodians and the Pharisees smirking now. They're just waiting for this whole thing to blow up in Jesus' face. Finally, they can send him back north. One afternoon a few years ago, we were sitting in the offices of the Basilica of St. Mary in Minneapolis waiting for Casey to introduce Rabbi Harold Kushner of When Bad Things Happen to Good People fame at an NPR program. And as we waited, the three of us began to talk a lot about our professions as ministers and rabbis. We began to talk about preaching and fundraising and pastoral care. And I said, Rabbi Kushner, I've always wanted to ask. I'm aware that when rabbis are asked a question, that the teaching style is that you always ask a question back. And so my question to you is, why do rabbis always do that? To which Rabbi Kushner responded, why not? Now, Rabbi Kushner did not invent the question for question teaching style of the rabbinic tradition, for did you notice Jesus in our story today employs it too? For when asked about the legality of paying taxes, Jesus responds with another question. So whose image is on this coin, Jesus asked. Caesar's, they reply. And then Jesus cryptically responds, then render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. How does Emeril Lagasse say it? Bam! It's a great answer, don't you think? That's going to spice things up a bit in the days to come in Jerusalem. Spice it up because the plot between the Pharisees and the Herodians to entrap Jesus now falls utterly flat, with Matthew saying, and when they heard Jesus' response, they were amazed and they left him and they just went away. Not bad, you think? Not bad for a country boy in his first inning in the big leagues. He struck out the side. Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians left staring at the strike zone, puzzled over what all has happened, because they knew they just heard something significant, but they just didn't know what it was. See, Jesus didn't, after all, precisely answer the question. Instead, he widened the scope of the inquiry. He changed the question, responding that the question is not simply, should we or should we not pay taxes? No. The question is, to whom do we owe allegiance? Who has ultimate authority in our lives, and why? I love how Tertullian wrote about this text back in the 4th century. Tertullian rephrased Jesus' comments about the coin, his response, this way. He said, "Render unto Caesar Caesar's image, which is after all on the coin, and render unto God God's image, which is after all on the man." Think about it. I mean, haven't our scriptures reminded us time and time again that we are made in the image of God? We are imprinted with it. It is stamped on us. So you see what Jesus is driving to here? Jesus is saying, look, folks, you give Caesar the coins to run the economy, and you give God yourself. For the coin of God's realm, the coin of God's realm, the coin of God's realm is you. And it's true, you know, we are God's currency in this world. We are the most important instruments of God's economy, giving out the coins of our lives through forgiveness and compassion and love and understanding, vision and justice and hope and reconciliation and patience and understanding and courage and fortitude and acceptance. I mean, Fort Knox may hold a lot of the gold, and the banks may hold a lot of the money of Caesar's, but you hold God's currency. Of course, the image of God can be sometimes difficult to recognize, can it not? As Richard Spalding notes, when we look at each other or in the mirror, we tend to see the inscriptions that the world has left on us. You are what you look like, what you have, what you wear, what you do, the company you keep. Nevertheless, Jesus seems to be saying that underneath all of these inscriptions of the world, there's a much deeper mark. And it is the watery sign of a cross made once upon your forehead, just like it was on little Ava this morning. And it's that image that God sees in you, the image for which Jesus stands behind with full faith and credit. Yes, to bear God's image, to be the coin of God's realm, to spend our lives in service to God's economy, that's what Jesus is suggesting here, I do believe. It's our duty to do so. Yes, the Herodians and the Pharisees, they'd ask Jesus a tricky, but in Jesus' mind, trivial question. And it did not trip Jesus up at all, because Jesus knew that in God's economy, the coin with Caesar's image was just pocket change. But our human lives which bear God's image, are priceless. You know, this way of looking at this text this week had a profound effect upon me, because most of us don't naturally or automatically see the image of God emblazoned across every face we see, do we? I mean, we if we're honest about it, we Christians are prone, as everybody else, to see all the subtleties of distinctions society helps us to cultivate about one another. Things like who's pretty and who's successful, who's clever, who's funny. Someone commented on my big glasses this last week. Why do you wear big glasses? I said, because since I can't lose weight, you know, if you can't lose it, decorate it. So yeah, we all see these distinctions in one another, do we not? We do. But you see, Jesus is suggesting we ought to see something deeper in one another and in ourselves. We ought to see so much, not what separates us, but what unites us. Not what divides us, but what we hold in common. Not our differences, but our samenesses. We ought to see that indelible, precious image of God that's carefully stamped on each one of us. And what's more, in seeing it, it ought to make us acknowledge that we owe a kind of tender compassion to all of God's children who we share that image with. Now, I don't know how many of you are college football fans. Probably the ones with bags under your eyes from the Florida State game last night are a few. But there's been a college football frenzy all over the state of Mississippi in the last 2 weeks. As both the University of Mississippi and Mississippi State have ended up ranked in the top 5 in the nation, is something that's never occurred before. And the game which propelled Mississippi State into this rarefied era was the game they played last Saturday against the Auburn Tigers. Auburn was last year's runner-up to the national title, on target at 5-0 to do it yet again when they came into Starkville, home of Mississippi State Bulldogs, for a 2:30 Central Time kickoff. 62,000 people in stands to cheer on the Bulldogs, and reportedly another 50,000 or so out in the streets watching on giant television stations. Starkville, now the largest city in Mississippi for a day. And this is where little 7-year-old Julia Ladd, a second grader at New Hope Elementary School in Starkville, Mississippi, comes in. Julia's parents are alums of Mississippi State, and believing this would be an experience she needed to be a part, they brought Julia with her to the game. Julia was dressed in maroon with a white bow in her hair, holding bulldog pom-poms. She had a little bulldog painted on her face and a big button that read, "Hail State." They took their seats right in the middle of the Mississippi State cheering section, which was a sea of maroon and white and bedlam. And looking around, little Julia immediately noticed this lone man 2 rows in front of her wearing an Auburn hat. And of course, wearing an Auburn hat stood out in this section of Mississippi State fans. Well, as the game rolled on, this gentleman never responded to the guys in front of him who would shake their Mississippi State cowbells at him when they jumped out to a 21-3 lead. The lone man would just smile and he watched the game. And the ribbing of this Auburn guy continued as the game rolled into the second half. But then as the momentum began to turn Auburn's way, the man sitting right in the middle of the Bulldog section would simply clap for his team. No yelling. No fist pumping, no going after the guys who'd been bothering him, nothing but a clap. Well, the score was 28-20. The momentum was shifting when Auburn had this long pass down the field to Sammy Coates. He took it in at the 18-yard line, and that whole Mississippi State section went absolutely, positively silent. In fact, all you could hear in that maroon and white section was this lone man clapping. And then there was this roar. Go Auburn! But the roar was not from the crowd. It was coming from little 7-year-old Julia. It was one of those sweet, innocent, multi-syllable kind of cheers that only a little girl from the South can make. Go Auburn. Quickly, Julia's mother bent down and she rebuked her. Julia, we root for Mississippi State, not for Auburn. And Julia put her head down and was crushed. Beginning to cry, her father leaned over and he said, Julia, why did you cheer for Auburn? She looked up, she said, because Daddy, I felt sorry for that man in the Auburn hat sitting all alone. And I decided he needed another cheerer. Julia's mother posted a photo of Julia and her new Auburn fan friend on Facebook after the game with a comment that read, Julia has taught us all something. She's taught us, as fun as a football game and as friendly rivalries can be, it's not everything. Charles Dickens once, in appreciation for the love of his children, wrote, it's no small thing that they who are so fresh from God love us. I've always loved that line because it is, Maybe children so fresh from God can recognize God's image more readily than we weary, battle-hardened, Caesar-stricken adults do. Day after day, year after year, we function in our world paying our taxes, doing our duty, honoring the various authorities in our life. But let us never, ever lose the vision that those fresher from God than ourselves seem to have, that the image of God is imprinted everywhere. And our fullest and highest responsibility is to God, for we owe God our very selves. And honoring God's image means loving everyone who bears God's image, being their cheerers. For in God's eyes, I truly do believe we are all meant for the big leagues. We were meant for it. It's who we are. It's what our baptismal vows have created. You are God's currency. So let's get out there, folks. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. It's going to get its due. But render unto God what is God's. Because with all that's going on in this world right now, God's currency, you, is desperately needed, I would suggest. Pray with me, please. O God, from whom to be turned away is to fall, to whom to be turned is to rise, and in whom to abide is to stand forever. Grant us in all our duties your help, in all our perplexities your guidance, in all our dangers your protection, and in all our sorrow your peace. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, our life, and our guide. Amen.